It's a tough gig. It's been tough back then. It's even tougher today. But I think what's going to be the most challenging part for this newer generation of trainer, and Angus Fletcher spoke about it with his work with the US Special Forces, them being able to recruit this new generation of US Special Forces is becoming more challenging because of the schooling system. And the schooling system, how they're just training them on their logical brain. You can outsource that to the computers. And so you're training these people that are not anti-fragile, and therefore they don't know how to pivot when something changes in an instance. And all of a sudden there's that shock factor of, I need stability in my life. I need to know what happens in my next step forward, as opposed to operating in chaos and operating in variance.
I remember beforehand, when I was retail trading, I'm trying to trade at home, thinking, this isn't working. Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll read a new psychology book. And I remember being here and one of the senior traders mentioning to me, saying, look, these psychology books are great, and they are great, but you need to have edge first. If you haven't got edge first, then the psychology is very valid, it is very important, but you need to be able to work with something and not having that edge. So let's go into psychology a little bit on this section and talk about the dangers of a growth mindset. Take it away on that.
So discussing about the dangers of a growth mindset, it's essentially understanding where you are in your journey. And so if you look at this continuous spectrum, or you look at the spectrum, and on the one side, you have that pure isolated individual at home, trying to work out the market by himself, not willing to learn outside of his own mind, no extension of the mind. And then the other side, the super uber liberal growth mind, digesting everything that's around him. Now, you want a trader that's starting in his career to veer more towards the growth mindset.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, once you start gaining and developing an edge, your spectrum, you always want to be, I would say, if there's the middle of, your hybrid of isolated mind, growth mindset, you want to be halfway between the middle and the growth mindset. Now, the problem with when you are on a bad run, say as a senior trader, you lost your form, so you're a bit formless in who you are as a trader, in how you identify yourself as a trader. And all of a sudden, your membrane, you're listening too much, too far. There's no piecemeal engineering. You're actually expanding your ability to listen to 1,000 messages just becomes too wide, and the net becomes too wide. And then what happens there starts becoming confusion. The brain also likes to have one strategic goal. It's something we spoke about in the workshop with Angus Fletcher. But that growth mindset, there's also the prostitution of the growth mindset, is if you are watching 1,000 podcasts, listening to multiple different ways of trading, but none of them you're deeply assimilating and you reflecting deeply on. It's like you're just a shallow observer. You listen, interesting, let me look into that. But instead of taking something that resonates with you, understanding 10 information inputs and taking 2 things that deeply resonate. Because you also have to see where your biological tendencies are of what resonates with you. And so I always suggest, every week for a junior trader, pick, you've acquired as much as 10 to 20 data points from the floor, of opportunity set. Pick 2 of them for the weekend for you to go deeper, because that's now expanding. You're doing depth work instead of wide, shallow work. And then that compounding effect is profound. But now when you're a senior trader and you lose your form, sometimes you actually have to auto-correct if you're on this, I'm listening to, so many people, so much about speaking to the performance coach, speaking to the risk manager coach, that you have to auto-correct and a little bit go back into yourself. So there's never a golden ratio or a golden solution or a holy grail for, whenever you become a fundamentalist on any side, you start becoming being unbalanced. But there's times of how you oscillate, and that's a skill of when you oscillate. Now, if you're an isolated mind forever, you'll eventually disintegrate into nothing. Your edge will become expired. You become expired. Your research and development department becomes thin, and then you disintegrate. But you can also disintegrate when you lose yourself because you're listening to all these messages, but you're not processing them deeply. So how do you work. And so that what what we mean by the dangers of a hyper growth mindset. A powerful growth mindset is the ability to take 10 data points, 2 that resonate with you, go deep into them, understand them, move on. As opposed to someone, or what happens to a lot of traders, they get these 15 data points and focus on one for the day, then the next they focus on 2 the other day, and then they just are on this walkabout in the market where they can be lost, and they can be lost for extended, or another walkabout, they're doing multiple courses. Find the right team that resonates with you, where those edges resonate with you, where it makes sense. But part of your life as a journey, developing as a trader, the beginning parts of your career is doing a lot of training that might not, it's just your journey, right? You do what was a great course now, 5 years later saying, actually, even though it was a crap course, it sent me on my journey because I was curious in the path.
Yeah. So and I mean, just going back to what you're saying about the data points, that was something that I remember I found myself doing. And I want to ask you a question. I mean, how important is it to, again, I think is also, apart from the red Christmas theme, the showing up factor, right? How important is it to, and we've had multiple discussions on this, is it to come in on a weekend, like where your mind is in a completely different space? How important is something like that to be able to really kind of disengage from the noise of the day and to really kind of broaden your aspect?
Yeah, the mechanics of your mind is substantially different, and the way your mind operates and solves problems when it's detached from the market during the week than on the weekend is substantially, it's a different machinery. And so that weekend operation, if you create a powerful framework, and we speak about this on our blueprint coaching program, and I have a couple of workshops there, is how you organize your weekend work is some of the most profound. And one of our top profile traders, an 8-figure trader, his edge is how he organizes his weekend review of the past week and what inputs he's taken from the past week, that he's in a stress test on the weekend in a different mind state. Because I've mentioned this multiple times, and probably people are tired of me hearing this. Is when you detach from the markets on the weekend, you've had a good sleep, you've woken up, you've gone for a little run, a swim in the sea here in Cyprus or in Bahamas, you get to your desk, you're in a more relaxed manner. When you're more relaxed, you're more creative. When you're more creative, your problem-solving skills are significantly higher. And so all of a sudden, the trades and plays that you observe during the week, you just see them in a whole different light. And that's where the compounding happens. For me, the weekend activity is profoundly important. I say, you should devote a minimum and a max of around 3 hours. You don't want to overstretch yourself, because you also want to rejuvenate your psychology on the weekend and your physiology. And so that weekend work, you're operating with a different machinery, and that machinery has different purposes and different objectives. So the traders who don't use that space on the weekend do struggle to accelerate their development. But you also need to know how to structure your weekend infrastructure.
Yeah. And speaking on a similar kind of topic, and again, something that we've been discussing, and actually something I was discussing with another one of the traders today, how the generation is different now. The younger kids, I mean, like my kids, they want to watch, I don't know, Ben and Holly or whatever it is. They know, hit the Netflix button and it's there. Oh no, I'm bored with that. I want the next thing. And I think there's too much of this whole on-demand culture that we're kind of like in between in. I might be wrong in my thinking, but it's how I kind of see it. So, I mean, we kind of grew up with, using TV as an example, had to watch whatever my parents wanted to watch during the daytime, just so I could watch Gladiators in the afternoon, right? And
now today you just watch Gladiators when you want to watch it.
Yeah, because you've got it, right? And I think I see a lot of that with trading, with some of the traders who've come, who they've learned the latest new fad, on YouTube or new strategy. And as you said, strategies come and go. And that was such a profound thing that you said on that last conversation. And it's how difficult is it to kind of navigate that? Because it's a very different world now with, you know, the youngsters coming up, and are they in that kind of like in between mode? How can you kind of hit home to these youngsters that, you know, there is that grind, there is that, you know, you've got to kind of stick through it, and how is it going to be in 10, 15 years?
Yeah, it's you know, it's something I ask myself every year, you know, just seeing 20 years of new traders coming in on a yearly basis, you know, majority drop out. It's a tough gig. It's been tough back then. It's tough today. It's even tougher today. But I think what's going to be the most challenging part for this newer generation of trader, and Angus Fletcher spoke about it with his work with the US Special Forces, them being able to recruit this new generation of US Special Forces is becoming more challenging because of the schooling system. And the schooling system, how they're just training them on their logical brain. You can outsource that, you know, to the computers. And so you're training these people that are not anti-fragile, and therefore they don't know how to pivot when something changes in an instance. And all of a sudden there's that shock factor of, I need stability in my life. I need to know what happens in my next step forward, as opposed to you know, operating in chaos and operating in variance, and which our forefathers had to do all the time. You know, even more so our ancient forefathers. And so that ability to be anti-fragile, operating in volatility, operating in chaos, how you train that, and, you know, it's one of the main aspects of the workshops that we had in Bahamas. But what I suppose happening is some of the subliminal psychology that's being trained when you're on a phone and you are just scrolling. You're not receiving any friction of what you want. But life has friction, right? Life has friction, so your emotional responses is much more severe in reality when you're dealing with someone, or you're at your trading desk and all of a sudden you feel, oh man, maybe trading's not for me. Because the first moment you deal with friction, you feel this isn't for you. And so your ability to deal with friction, instead of like sticking through and saying, okay, dealt with friction, what's this telling me about myself? How am I interpreting this emotional response? You know, emotional responses, you know, we're speaking about this on a training webinar this week, is emotional responses, you know, also as Angus Fletcher mentions, are these ancient mechanisms or signal systems for us to grow from if we know how to listen to them and what they're telling us. But majority of us, we ignore it, we receive the information, we get emotionally distraught, and, you know, we hate everyone and anything, you know, around us. But that ability to deal with friction becomes less and less so apparent when you're receiving these constant dopamine hits. You know, so you can get whatever material, whatever you want, whereas when you're a youngster, you had to wait 10 hours to watch your Superman. Okay, so you had to be patient for that. And then you were, you know,
you get rewarded.
Yeah, you get reward. Now you can get that Superman in that moment. So that's ability. And so then people also asking themselves, like, are shallow touching every single profession. Okay, this isn't for me, let me try this. And the moment they receive friction in their job, in their career, and trading, you receive friction consistently. People don't know how to deal with that. So we have to find those people who you know, who have dealt with friction, how they overcome friction. And because friction is becoming less and less so, and that's why people are, I imagine, you know, a modern generation, it's harder for them to kind of be focused on that one thing that they're passionate about, because they feel with friction, it's not your passion, because passion should not have friction.